Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. Madam Prime Minister, thank you for this opportunity. And considering our delay, I'll just go right into the question. And I want to talk first about climate. You're not at COP26, and I understand why. You're going to be hosting APEC. You got some logistical and COVID reasons also why you're not traveling there. But is it a missed opportunity? Are you concerned that you weren't there in person for this high-stakes climate summit?
Well, certainly, I did wish to be there. That would have been certainly something that I would have very much liked to have been a part of, because this is a critical moment for all of us. And so, albeit as somewhat of a substitute, this is why I am here in this dialogue now. It is important that regardless of whether I'm physically present there, that New Zealand is part of the discussion and the debate, and that we are continuing to push for collective ambition and demonstrating that ambition ourselves.
I want to talk about this demonstration of collective ambition because, look, I think we hear a lot of good talk about pledges with climate, and different countries talk about different pledges. But then when it comes time to actually enact it at home, there becomes some domestic challenges. We have it in this country, and you've been having it in your country. How do you overcome the not in my backyard? Don't make me pay for this climate change mitigation. Make someone else pay for it. That seems to be the sticking point, whether you're in New Zealand, America, or Europe.
You're absolutely right. That is part of the debate, be it climate action or be it other issues where sometimes all of the incentives sit around making politically expedient decisions that are easier for your domestic audience. However, climate change is in our backyard. We're members of the Pacific. You do not have to travel far. Indeed, you can see here in New Zealand the extreme weather events that we are experiencing now, let alone what our Pacific neighbours are experiencing. In some countries, it is an immediate threat to their lives and indeed their livelihoods. I visited not so long ago an atoll in the Pacific where you could see that we had supported to undertake adaptation. Already, that adaptation effort, so seawalls had been overrun and overburdened. So for us, it is in our backyard and it does make it immediate. The thing that we need to keep pushing on, though, of course, is that there's never any excuse not to contribute and do your bit. Some may say that New Zealand's contribution to global emissions, is relatively small. But how can we stand on the world stage and call for actions by others unless we commit ourselves? We've made a very steep increase in our commitment, and it is a steep increase. We want to reduce via our NDCs emissions by 50% over the next 10 years. That will take a lot of domestic action, and it will take a significant commitment on behalf of New Zealand and New Zealanders.
Look, somewhat on one hand, yes, what you just said, I take your point, but there's been some criticism in your own country saying, you know what, per capita, New Zealand should do more. But I also understand the hesitance, and this is the concern I have. A lot of countries say, well, we'll do more, but only if they do more. You hear it in our country. Well, we'll only do as much as China will do, and China isn't willing to do as much. How do you overcome that, and are you willing to do more than your neighbors?
Yeah, and look, we can't get ourselves into a situation where our action is reliant on the action of others, because who pays the price in that game but all of us? Our position has always been we can't hold our heads up on the world stage and call for action unless we demonstrate that leadership ourselves. And we have been amongst, as has many countries around the world, where over the past several decades not enough action has been taken. And so we are in a position now of undertaking quite a steep rise in our commitments. But we've said in our domestic laws, we've targeted that 1.5 degrees because that is what it will take to ensure that our Pacific neighbours have a livelihood. And so it's not enough to simply say, we'll wait until everyone else does their bit. I've heard that argument. We have to do ours now, lest we all end up on a steep drop to the bottom.
Coastal communities, you have the debate, we have the debate here, rebuild or relocate. And it seems to me as an island nation, relocate is probably the safer answer, but it's probably the more unpopular answer.
Actually, I hear that debate more acutely amongst our neighbours. And I remember not long ago attending a Pacific Island forum where one of the Pacific Island leaders said that to focus so heavily on the relocate is almost a way of dropping the ambition that we collectively need to have to continue to mitigate. And I really heard that. I think that we have to make sure that, yes, we have planning in place, that we future-proof ourselves as much as possible, but we don't allow that to become a backstop, a first measure rather than a backstop measure. Our Pacific Island neighbours want to see us still driving hard towards 1.5 degrees rather than simply start planning for a future that is not in their homeland, that it leads to perhaps the loss of culture and language and all of those things that are incredibly important for them to protect. So who am I to determine what they want for their future? But I certainly was really moved by hearing that.
I want to shift to another topic, China. In this country, if I said ally or adversary, most of our, I think, population would pick the word adversary. What about New Zealand?
I think we would see, here in New Zealand, I don't think we would determine our relationship with any country in such stark terms. Mm-hmm. We've had a long-standing relationship with China, and yes, it is one that is heavily, in more recent times, based on trade, our strong trading relationship. But equally, New Zealand has always been very consistent in saying, regardless of that economic relationship, we do still believe that we have the maturity in our relationship to raise issues that we're concerned about, be it human rights issues, be it labour issues, be it environmental issues. And that's very important to us that we continue to be able to do that and do that regardless of those trading ties. Given the
tougher retaliatory tariffs and things like that China's done to Australia, has that dampened the ability? Do you feel as if New Zealand can't be as critical considering what happened to Australia, or not?
Oh, very important. It's very important to us that we maintain integrity in the way that we conduct our diplomatic relationships. And so, yes, I've absolutely observed, the tensions that exist between various trading nations and China. And we've certainly noted those heightened tensions and seen that ourselves. But for us, we will always be consistent. It won't change the way that we behave. It's important to us that we continue to have that integrity, that we raise those issues that concern us. And as a small nation, the advocacy you'll see from us in conducting those trading relationships is the importance of a rules-based order. We will continue to use, for instance, the WTO to pursue issues that we see that we believe should be dealt with fairly through those trading organisations, regardless of what might be happening in diplomatic circles.
President Biden has stated on the world stage that America is back, and it's his way of referring to the Trump era. Do you accept that? And do you think America is still the leading democracy in the world?
There is no doubt that the United States has an incredibly important role to play in the Indo-Pacific region, no question. And for some time now, there has been calls from our region for greater engagement here. In particular, I'd say it's not just about those issues that are often viewed through a strategic defence lens, but actually we would really welcome the United States presence in some of that economic architecture, increasing those trading relationships in our region. And so we welcome any signalling that demonstrates that that's where the United States is heading towards. We welcome that physical presence being part of important talks in our region, and we have seen that greater engagement in recent times.
Do you think the United States made a mistake pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and now China's applying to basically be a part of what's left of it? Are you disappointed the United States isn't involved, and are you concerned that China is?
Well, in our view, the CPTPP has set, I think, a really high bar for what free trade agreements and multilateral, multi-country free trade agreements can look like into the future, and we would welcome any country into that agreement that's willing to meet those standards. And so, indeed, if the United States is willing to do so, I'm sure countries would be welcome to see that bid come from the United States. But again, you'll see that there's a number of countries have expressed interest, and everyone has said the same thing. If you're willing to engage and be a part of that agreement and meet those standards, then we welcome that.
Is there a line, though, when it comes to a country's human rights record, that you think New Zealand or any other country shouldn't be doing trade with that country?
Well, ultimately, the standards are embedded within the agreement themselves. So, of course, labour standards are embedded with the agreement. So, countries who wish to be a part of it, it's not about necessarily making a values judgment. Those value judgments are embedded in the agreement themselves, and so that really becomes the test.
You've had your challenges with domestic extremism. We've had our challenges with domestic extremism. You've talked about this, and its relationship with social media, and you want to see a global effort here to deal with these social media networks that seem to amplify this extremism. What does that look like in your view?
If I were to just really simplify it, I mean, there's obviously for some time now been an ongoing debate around the environment that, frankly, our children are growing up online. And how do you bring balance to the rights and freedoms of individuals to engage in those platforms, freedom of speech, but also to not create platforms where, by anyone's common sense measure, you see hate amplified or indeed violence. Now, we had an extreme example of that here in New Zealand when on what is now known as March 15 in the city of Christchurch, a terrorist took the lives of many members of our Muslim community, and it was broadcast live. Now, that is an example of something that there would be no argument, I'm sure, from anyone that was an acceptable thing to happen on a social media platform, and yet it did. And so our approach here in New Zealand was that we felt a duty of care to try and seek reform, working in partnership with those platforms to change the future around how they're able to be accessed so that it would never happen again. I think we just need to boil it down to a simple measure. How do we create a place where we feel it's safe for our kids to be? It doesn't have these long-term mental health impacts, where we don't see the ability to perpetuate hateful ideology or indeed violent ideology. And that's what we're seeking to do. And I think you'd find, regardless of country or culture, general agreement with objectives like that.
The final question here, and I know you don't want to weigh into our domestic politics, but we're having a debate about paid leave. And we're okay.
Yes, I will. You'll notice I'll avoid that.
I understand that. But let me ask you this. You're just expanded
far away.
In New Zealand, you expanded it from 18 to 26 weeks. Explain how you sold it to your public. I'm sure you had some of the same resistance about increased taxes to pay for this. How did you sell it to the New Zealand public?
The most important stage of a child's life are those first 1,000 days. And the most important thing that we can do to support citizens in the future to be the very best that they can is to support our children and our mothers to be able to form strong attachment and bonds with one another. All of the science, all of the research supports that. So actually, to be honest, it wasn't a hard sell. I think the New Zealand public knows and believes that. And equally, for me also, I see it as a health issue. Our mothers need time to recover and to be with their babies. So it makes good sense that we allow them the time and the space to do that. And so that's why it wasn't such a hard sell, perhaps.
Prime Minister Ardern, I know you're busy. Appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much for yours.